welcome for my next session. It is my pleasure to welcome Jay Meyer back to the stage. Jay is the author of the PKI fallacy, which if you've been to our sessions, our events here before, you are familiar with. He's the SVP of Face Tech, which is coming off another quarter, significant growth, clocking more than 300 million liveness checks, I believe, in during Q1 of this year. And then that was in addition to tripling their very unique spoof bounty program with that payments up to $600,000. Jay, welcome back.
Thank you very much, Peter. And I have to say, it's an honor to be able to follow Joe Attic on this program. I've known Dr. Attic for a very long time, and I've always had great respect for him. And I have to say that, all of the academic and thoughtful discussion that Find Biometrics promotes about biometrics, and also how biometrics fit in the broader identity solution, is really important and powerful. It's not enough just to be a good salesman. We have to actually solve some problems, and that's what we're trying to do at Face Tech. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of these newfangled credentialing schemes that are out there, and point out what is a weakness in some of those schemes. This is something that I've talked about many, many times, and it's interesting because the problem is starting to emerge front and center in most of these deployments. And, I go back to this slide. We are seeing, we're becoming inundated with false credentials, fake IDs. Okay. And we joke about these things over the years. A lot of people, I never did, but a lot of people had fake IDs so they could go buy beer on Friday night when they were in college or something like that. Right. Well, there are companies on the dark web that are selling customized fake credentials, and for $150 you can buy a driver's license that is effectively perfect. They are almost flawless to the actual credentials that are out there, only they have someone else's legitimate identity data on them along with your face. And so suddenly these fake IDs are almost irrefutable. Well, there are some things that are happening today that kind of show that this is really a problem. That slide was originally from 2021. And here we are. This is an article that was published by the BBC just yesterday that talks about a guy who was selling fake passports. And these are the digital passports. Okay. This guy figured out how he could buy identity data from prisoners and other people, right, for just a small amount of money. And then he would apply for a renewed passport, and he would include someone else's picture in the passport. So the renewed new passport that came back had a legitimate identity associated with it, but it had the wrong picture. It had a fraudster's picture, right? And the chip embedded in the passport tells everybody that the passport is legitimate. And so suddenly these new safety features that we're seeing in these, in some of these credentialing systems are becoming a vector for fraud. They're not preventing fraud. They're actually enabling fraud, right? If you know how to beat the system. So this is an article that came out on March 20 of this year. We have these things called mobile driver's licenses, and it's mobile driver's licenses, and we have these new forms of cryptographically hardened credentials out there, and we've seen people talk about these quite a bit. The Working Group 10, the ISO Technical Advisory Committee for the Mobile Driver's License Standard, published the standard a couple of years ago, or maybe a year and a half ago, and a lot was made of that. Okay, it's a big deal. And we see other organizations like the Verifiable Credentials. We see the self-sovereign movement. We see other types of identity management schemes out there that are focused on cryptographically strong credentials and cryptographic binding of those credentials to a device. Okay. The problem is that these systems are effectively incomplete. They have one very large vulnerability, and that is that they do almost nothing to ensure that the correct person is in control of the device that the credential is bound to. And I came up with this idea called the PKI fallacy, which is a false logic progression. And it says that if we, for some reason, we have this idea that if the credential is cryptographically strong and the binding between a cryptographically strong credential and a device is irrefutable, and we can prove that the device is correct, that somehow we know something about who's in control of the device. And the reality is that we're conflating two different security applications, and that conflation is a huge vulnerability. I'm going to go back to this slide. This is a state driver's license program in the United States, relatively new, right? The standard's only been out for a year and a half. So a guy, a fraudster, stole some identity data from his roommate, right? And then he went to the DMV and represented himself as his roommate and got the mobile driver's license provision to his phone, right? And then he used the phone and the cryptographically secure driver's license, although it was the wrong guy, he used that to go open bank accounts and borrow money to go buy a car. And he committed hundreds of thousands of dollars of identity theft fraud by tricking the system into provisioning a cryptographically secure document to his device. And the device told everybody that he was the guy that was represented by the document. Only he wasn't. He was a fraudster. That's the PKI fallacy in action, folks. And this is happening right now. Okay. Those two things that I just pointed out are only weeks old, and this is happening out there. So there's this problem that we have to solve for. One of the problems is the cryptography crowd. They're hubristic. These guys they approach this with such hubris. Okay. The problem is that they prefer what's called a deterministic result to a probabilistic result. A deterministic outcome is yes or no. It's 1 or 0. It's either the certificate is attached to the device, the certificate is valid or it's not, the credential is valid or it's not, right? We can have a high degree of confidence in those deterministic outcomes. It's binary. The problem is that user authentication, because people are not physically and permanently connected to the digital realm, authenticating people, verifying people in an unsupervised situation, and maybe even in a supervised situation, is probabilistic. It's a statistical probability that I am who I say I am when I'm applying for a privilege. Okay. Well, in an identity management scheme, you have deterministic cryptography-based applications, and you have probabilistic user authentication and verification applications. The thing that the crypto crowd doesn't understand is that when you use probabilistic and deterministic calculations in the same system, the only outcome you can have is a probabilistic outcome. Okay, that is mathematically the vulnerability that these people are actually taking advantage of. And yet we have a lot of new credentialing ideas out there that simply don't really do much to determine who's in control of the device and therefore who is in control of the credential itself. This is from the AMVA for the DMV. There's one here for verifiable credentials. There's one here that talks about self-sovereign. They all suffer the same vulnerability, folks. And so the thing that I want people to come away with is that these, in and of themselves, they are nice systems. They are very secure. The credentials are irrefutable. The binding to the device is irrefutable. But in and of themselves, they do nothing to ensure that you're the person who's allowed to use that credential. And that problem needs to be solved. Well, guess what? Biometrics are the way you do that. Biometrics are the only authenticator that is derived from a physical human being. Okay. We have hundreds of different authenticators out there. We can talk about passwords, and we know that the password was dead 10 years ago, only for some reason it's still alive, right? We can talk about accelerometers and geospatial location stuff, and we can talk about device fingerprint and ID and blah, blah, blah. They're all the same basic authenticator, right? They are devices, they are authenticators that are bound to devices and not to people. The problem is that we bind privileges to people, not devices. Okay, my opportunity to use a credit card is not dependent on my device. It shouldn't be. It should be dependent on me being the right guy, right? So the solution is to bind a proven verified identity, for Jay Meyer, for example, to a biometric that we know was derived from Jay Meyer, right? The biometric needs to be liveness proven, so we know that it's not a spoof attempt. It's not an injection attack. It's not a fraudulent application. And then we have to also bind all of my permissions and rights and privileges to my biometric, not to the device. Okay. And at that point, the device doesn't really matter so much, because if we're using a true biometric to ensure that I'm the person that's allowed to use, that's authorized to use those privileges, then if we know that for certain, it doesn't matter what device I use, right? I think that makes sense. Well, here's the thing, a lot of people are like, yeah, biometrics are great and any biometric is great and we can use whatever biometric we want. Well, it's not the case, okay? AI, the fraudsters are using AI more effectively than legitimate people, okay? This article was published just yesterday. It's from USA Today. And it's simply a discussion of how AI is being used to fake voices and fake other types of authenticators, right? To fool somebody else, a relying party, into believing that you are somebody you may not be, right? This is powerful technology. And what AI does for the fraudster is effectively make obsolete most of the authenticators out there, including voice biometrics. Banks love voice biometrics, but banks don't love to tell you that voice biometrics doesn't work all that well, right? So they won't tell you that their systems are insecure because they can't. What bank would actually say that, right? So here's the warning shot, folks. If you're using voice biometrics to make sure that I'm who I say I am, you might be making a huge mistake and authenticating a fraudster every time. And here's the other thing. The biometric that's on your phone, whether it's a fingerprint or a face or whatever it is, it's anonymous, okay? There's a thing called a secure element in the phone. Some call it a secure enclave, whatever they call it. There's a million names for it. It's a little area that holds biometric data that is collected when someone enrolls on the phone, right? And it's cryptographically secure, right? There's cryptography, so it's got to be good. Well, here's the thing. The data that's stored in that cryptographically secure enclave is anonymous. The biometric data that is captured is not attached to an identity profile anywhere. It's bound to the device, right? Apple and Samsung and companies like that love binding stuff to their devices. Why? Because it means they're going to be able to sell more devices in the future, right? That's why Apple wants your device to be you out in the ecosystem, because they get the upgrade on the next phone, right? Well, the problem is that biometric data is anonymous. The phone doesn't know whose biometric that is, and it can be changed. If I had your phone and I had the PIN, I could change your biometric data for mine, and your phone wouldn't know the difference. Your phone would authenticate me as you every time. And that means that the relying parties on the internet, the app provider, the bank service provider, whoever it is, they are also taking that tokenized affirmation from the secure enclave. They're taking that as an affirmation that the person holding the phone is the person entitled to the privilege, right? There's no way for them to know that it's not me. And so here in just a couple months ago, in the UK, some fraudsters, some criminals figured this out. And they're what they call surfing, I guess, shoulder surfing. They're looking over people's shoulders and they're seeing them enter their PIN like in nightclubs. And then they're stealing the person's phone, entering the PIN and replacing the biometric that's there with their own. And then they're borrowing money and they're using credit cards and they're doing things that thieves do when they get someone else's identity data. So this isn't a hugely scalable thing, but if you were an important person at a technology company and that's how you were authenticated to get into the system, kind of like what happened with SolarWinds, your employer wouldn't know that it's not you, right? So it doesn't have to be scalable to be a big problem, right? So we need to be sure that we need to move from this anonymous biometrics to something that makes more sense. So what makes a biometric verification strong? Well, you need to verify the integrity of the sensor, right? You need to make sure that the data that's collected from the camera is real data and it has not been injected from someone else. You need to verify the person's legal identity and then bind liveness proven biometric data to that verified identity somewhere, whether that is in an employment human resources profile or at the DMV. That's, the issuing authority is really the place to do this because they have presumably the least refutable, the purest data about us at the State Department, the passport people, right? At the Department of Motor Vehicles for driver's licenses. So if we bind biometric data, if we prove the identity when we enroll somebody, and then we capture liveness proven biometric data from that person in real time while they are being enrolled, we can bind the biometric data to the profile and then authenticate to that every time. So we know where the source biometric data came from, and we can match to it rather than trusting the anonymous biometrics that are on the phone. And this way, we'll know that the cryptographically secure credentials are legitimate, the credentials binding to the device is legitimate, the device is legitimate, and we'll know who is actually in control of the device. Liveness proven biometrics, 3D liveness proven face biometrics, and matching is actually the strongest way to go in this case. And that's all I have. If anybody has any questions, if anybody has any thoughts or comments or wants to discuss it, please reach out.
Yeah, reach out to Jay. I can attest. He's a great guy to chat with, and this is a great example of it. Jay, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to have you here, and looking forward to. I know we've got a few things coming up in between now and September, but also looking forward to September. So, thanks, Jay.
Looking forward to it, Peter. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.